It was a crisp autumn morning when I opened the front door to grab the newspaper. The air smelled of damp leaves, a reminder that summer was long gone. I almost missed it at first, a plain white envelope lying just beside the welcome mat. There was no stamp, no return address, just my name handwritten in bold, capital letters. A chill ran through me as I picked it up. Something about it felt off. My hands trembled slightly as I tore the top open. Inside were photographs, a dozen, maybe more. Each one captured moments I thought had been mine alone, secret glances, stolen kisses, the unmistakable intimacy of a woman betraying her vows. My breath hitched as I flipped through them, my stomach twisting into a tight knot. The final item in the envelope was a small note typed in cold, impersonal black ink, "Tell him yourself or I will." My head swam. Who had sent this? A jilted lover? Someone at the hotel? Had we been followed? The possibilities twisted together in a dizzying spiral. I stumbled back into the house, locking the door behind me as if that could somehow keep this nightmare out. My heart pounded as I clutched the envelope to my chest, my mind racing through every possible outcome. Telling him wasn't an option, not now, not ever. I had built my life with Mark over 20 years, and though our marriage had lost its spark, I had never imagined it could all crumble so easily. He was a good man, steady, predictable. He didn't deserve this. But did I deserve to lose everything? To have my comfortable, secure life ripped apart by an anonymous stranger hiding in the shadows? I sank onto the couch, my fingers tightening around the photographs. There had to be a way out of this. A way to bury the truth before it surfaced. I needed to think, I needed to act fast, because whoever had left this message wasn't bluffing, and time was already slipping away.
By the way, if you're curious about what happened next, subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Thank you.
I spent the next few hours packing the house, replaying every moment of my affair in my mind, searching for a crack, a mistake, something that could have led to this. The hotel was discreet. We never used our real names. We always arrived separately, never left together, yet someone had seen us. Someone had cared enough to document it and leave this on my doorstep like a bomb waiting to explode. Mark was due home in a few hours. I had to pull myself together. My hands were still shaking as I stuffed the photographs back into the envelope and shoved it into the back of the kitchen drawer, behind stacks of old receipts and forgotten takeout menus. Out of sight, but not out of mind. I needed answers. I pulled out my phone and hesitated before dialing. Calling him was too risky. A text? No, that could be traced. I settled on a simple message to meet in person. It was better this way, face to face, no digital trail. If anyone could help me figure this out, it was him. I drove to our usual spot, a dimly lit bar just outside the city. He was already there, nursing a drink, his dark eyes scanning the room before locking onto mine. He could tell something was wrong before I even sat down. "What happened?" he asked, leaning in. "You look like you just saw a ghost." I slid the note across the table, my fingers barely able to let go. He read it, his face unreadable, then looked up at me. "Do you have any idea who sent this?" "None, it was just there on my doorstep this morning. No name, no return address, just this and pictures." His jaw tight. "Pictures? Let me see." I shook my head. "I didn't bring them." He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. "This isn't good. If someone knows, that means they've been watching, and if they were bold enough to leave this, they might not stop at a warning." I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering. "So what do we do?" He leaned in closer, voice barely above a whisper. "We find out who they are before they go to him, and we stop them." I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pictures flashing in my mind, heard the echo of his words at the bar. "We find them before they find Mark." By morning, my nerves were frayed, but I forced myself to act normal. Mark kissed me on the forehead before heading out to work, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath my skin. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my keys and left. The hotel was our only lid. We had to start there. He was already waiting for me in the parking lot when I arrived. "You sure about this?" he asked as I stepped out of my car. "If someone saw us here once, they could see us again." "I don't have a choice," I muttered, pushing past him and into the lobby. The receptionist barely looked up from her screen as we walked past. We knew the way down the hall, past the ice machine, to room 214. I knocked, though I wasn't sure what I was expecting. A part of me hoped no one would answer. But the door creaked open, just a crack, and a woman's eyes met mine through the sliver of space. "Can I help you?" she asked, suspicion lacing her voice. I hesitated. "I think you might know something about me." The door opened wider and she stepped back, letting us in. The room smelled of stale coffee and cheap perfume. She crossed her arms, waiting. Well, I took a deep breath. Someone left an envelope on my doorstep, pictures of me here with him. I nodded toward him, watching as her expression barely flickered. She exhaled through her nose, shaking her head. I had a feeling this was coming. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" She motioned toward the small table by the window. A second envelope sat there, identical to mine. "I got one too, only mine didn't say to tell your husband. Mine said, stay out of this or you'll regret it." My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the envelope on the table. A second warning, but why her? What did she have to do with any of this? "Who sent it?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. She shook her head. "I don't know. It was under my door when I woke up. No return address, no name, just like yours, but someone wants me to stay quiet, which means I know something." I glanced at him, trying to gauge his reaction. His jaw was set, his hands clenched at his sides. "Think," he said, his tone sharper than usual. "Did you see anything that night? Anyone hanging around? A car in the parking lot? Anything?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the window. "There was a man." My heart pounded. "Who?" "I don't know. He wasn't staying here, I'm sure of it. I saw him outside when I was taking a break. He was smoking, just standing by the entrance watching. At first, I thought he was waiting for someone, but he never went inside." When I came back out an hour later, he was gone. A lead. It wasn't much, but it was something. What did he look like? He asked, already pulling out his phone as if he was about to start searching. Tall, older, maybe late 40s, early 50s, dark hair but going gray. He had a scar here. She motioned across her chin. I remember because it caught the light when he turned his head. I felt a shiver run down my spine. That description could fit 1,000 men, but the scar, it was something specific, something traceable. If he saw us together, he could have followed me home, I murmured, realization sinking in. Whoever he is, he knows where I live, he knows everything. He put a hand on my shoulder, grounding me. Then we need to find him first, before he makes his next move. The weight of his words settled over me like a stone in my chest. Find him first, but how? We didn't even have a name, just a vague description and a scar. She shifted uncomfortably. Look, I didn't sign up for this, I just work here, I don't want any trouble. It's too late for that, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Whoever he is, he's not just watching me, he's watching you too. If he knows you saw him, then you're already in this. Her face paled, and for a moment I thought she might ask us to leave. Instead, she let out a shaky breath. There's security footage. My pulse kicked up. From that night? She nodded. It's not great, cheap cameras, bad angles, but it might have caught him. Can you get it? He asked. She hesitated. The system automatically deletes after a week, but I know the manager. If I can get in before morning, I might be able to pull it. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was the best lead we had. Do it, he said, and be careful. If he left you that note, it means he's watching you too. If he thinks you're looking for him, I get it, she cut in, rubbing her arms as if to ward off a chill. I'll call you when I have something. I exchanged a glance with him. We needed more than just a grainy image from a security camera. We needed to know who this man was and what he wanted. Because if he was bold enough to leave those envelopes, he wasn't going to stop there. And I wasn't ready for what might come next. I barely made it through the rest of the day. Every noise outside sent a jolt through me. Every car that slowed in front of the house made my stomach turn. Mark came home like nothing was wrong, kissed me on the cheek, and asked what I wanted for dinner. I went through the motions, nodded when I needed to, laughed at the right moments, but my mind was elsewhere, on the stranger watching me, on the security footage, on the fact that my perfect life was dangling by a thread. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Then, just after midnight, my phone buzzed. A single message. Got it, meet me at the diner. I was out the door before I could second-guess myself, barely remembering to grab my keys. The streets were empty as I drove, my fingers gripping the wheel too tight. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, his expression unreadable. She sat across from him, a laptop open between them. I slid into the seat, my pulse hammering. Did you find him? She turned the screen toward me. The footage was grainy, black and white, a wide-angle shot of the hotel entrance. At first nothing, then a figure stepped into view, tall, older, the scar catching the light just as she described. He stood near the entrance for a long time, watching, not moving, not fidgeting, just watching. Then, as I appeared in the frame, walking into the hotel completely unaware, he turned and walked away. My stomach churned. He knew exactly what he was looking for. He leaned in, his jaw tight. We need to run this through facial recognition, cops, private databases, somebody has to know who he is. She hesitated. I don't know if we should. I looked up sharply. What, why? She glanced around, lowering her voice. Because he's not just some guy. I ran the footage through a low-level scan. He's been flagged before, FBI flagged. A cold wave crashed over me. FBI? She nodded. I don't know the details. Could be witness protection, could be something worse. But if we start digging into him, he'll know. My breath came shallow. The man watching me wasn't just some jealous husband or private investigator. He was someone dangerous. And now he knew that I knew. I sat there staring at the screen, my stomach twisting into knots. This wasn't just about some affair anymore. This was bigger, more dangerous. I had no idea who I had crossed, but now I was in their sights. We need to stop, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum of the diner. We can't keep looking. If he's flagged, if he's FBI level dangerous, then we back off. We pretend we never saw anything. We move on. He shook his head, his jaw clenched tight. You think he's going to just let this go? He left those photos for a reason. He wanted you to know he's watching. If we don't figure out who he is, we have no way of knowing what comes next. She closed the laptop, exhaling slowly. He's right. If this guy is connected to something bigger, then it's not just about you anymore. It's about control. He's testing you, seeing how you'll react, and if he doesn't get the reaction he wants, he might push harder. A sick feeling settled deep in my gut. So what do? We can't go to the police. What do I say? Hey, I was cheating on my husband, and now some shadowy figure is watching me? That's not an option. Then we get ahead of him, he said, voice firm. We find out what he wants before he has a chance to make his move. The words sent a chill down my spine. I had spent the last 24 hours consumed by fear, but he was right. I couldn't just sit back and wait for the next envelope, the next threat. If I wanted to keep my life intact, I had to do something. I straightened, forcing my hands to stop shaking. Okay, where do we start? She hesitated before speaking. There's one more thing. When I ran his image, I couldn't access much, but I did find something buried deep. An old alias linked to a business that shut down years ago. It wasn't much, but the address was local. My breath caught. How local? She met my gaze. 10 minutes from here. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady my nerves. This was real. This wasn't just some jealous husband or private investigator. It was something far bigger, something I had never been prepared for. He leaned in, his voice low. We go there now. We don't wait. The longer we sit on this, the more time he has to plan his next move. I swallowed hard. And if he's there, what then? She looked between us, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. We don't confront him, we watch. We see what kind of place it is, if it's even still in use. If it's abandoned, maybe we find something inside, something that tells us who he really is. I nodded, even though my body screamed at me to turn back. Everything about this felt like a mistake, but I knew the only thing worse than confronting this man was doing nothing at all. The drive was silent, tense. My hands clenched the steering wheel as I followed the GPS through dimly lit streets. The neighborhood had seen better days, rundown storefronts, flickering streetlights, sidewalks cracked with neglect. Then we saw it. A small, boarded-up building sat at the end of the street, its once bright sign faded beyond recognition. The windows were dark, but there was something off, something I couldn't put my finger on. I pulled into a space across the street, killing the engine. "Looks abandoned," I murmured, but even as I said it, I wasn't convinced. He peered through the windshield, studying the building. "Then why does it feel like we're being watched?" I sucked in a sharp breath, my skin prickling with unease. I followed his gaze, scanning the windows, the rooftops, the alleyways, nothing, and yet every instinct screamed that someone was there. She shifted in the backseat. Maybe this was a mistake. A light flickered inside, just for a second, just long enough to send ice through my veins. I turned to him, my voice barely a whisper. "Someone's in there." My pulse pounded in my ears as we sat frozen in the car, staring at the building. The light was gone now, but I knew what I had seen. Someone was inside, watching, waiting. I had no idea, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. He exhaled slowly, his fingers drumming against his knee. "We need to get closer, see if we can hear anything." She shook her head. "This is insane. We don't know who we're dealing with. What if he's armed? What if he's expecting us?" Her voice was a hushed whisper, but the fear was clear. I swallowed hard. "Then we don't go in, we just listen. If there's nothing, we leave, but if there's something, we'll know what we're up against," he finished, already reaching for the door handle. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to turn the car around and pretend none of this was happening. But I couldn't. If I ran now, I'd never stop running. We moved in silence, keeping to the shadows as we crept toward the building. The air was thick, humid, carrying the scent of damp concrete and something metallic, something that made my stomach turn. The closer we got, the stronger the feeling of being watched became. I fought the urge to glance over my shoulder, knowing that if someone was out there, I wouldn't see them until they wanted me to. He reached the door first, pressing his ear against the peeling wood. I did the same, holding my breath, straining to hear anything, footsteps, voices, anything. Then a sound. Faint but unmistakable, a phone ringing. A second later, the vibrating buzz of a cell phone echoed from inside, followed by a sharp click as someone answered. A voice, low, gruff, "Yeah, they're here." My blood turned to ice. We weren't just imagining things. We weren't being paranoid. He knew he had been waiting for us. He grabbed my wrist, pulling me back into the shadows. "We have to go now," but I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the ground, my brain caught in a cycle of fear and disbelief. How did he know we were here? Had he been watching us this whole time? She was already backing away, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. "We never should have come." Inside, the conversation continued. "Yeah, I see them. No, they haven't made a move yet." He cursed under his breath, tightening his grip on my arm. Now, I forced my legs to move, stepping backward as quietly as I could, but the second I shifted, the door creaked open. A silhouette stood in the doorway, backlit by the faint glow of a single overhead light. I couldn't make out his face, but I didn't need to. I could feel his gaze locking onto me. "Leaving so soon?" His voice was calm, too calm, like he had expected this. Like he had planned it. Panic surged through me. I turned, ready to run, but his next words froze me in place. "If you take another step, your husband finds out everything." The world tilted, my breath hitched. I turned back slowly, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. "What do you want?" He stepped forward into the dim light, and for the first time I saw his face. The scar on his chin, the graying hair, the eyes that seemed to dissect me in an instant. He wasn't angry, he wasn't desperate. He was in control. "Let's talk."
Thank you for watching the video. If you want to hear more stories, subscribe to the channel and like the video. Videos are released every day. Good luck to everyone.